There is a growing groundswell from people saying, we want our government transparent. We want to know what you're doing behind closed doors. I've been down there for a long time, as you know. And the thing that I find more frustrating than anything is how much of the business of the people is done behind closed doors.
How so?
You see lawmakers walking off the floor and going into somebody's office, and the law is pretty clear. Wherever two or more is gathered, that's open to the public, and those meetings go on all over, just every single day. There's not a day that somebody is out there having a meeting with another lawmaker or with a whole handful of lawmakers, and you're not hearing about it.
The legislative session is over, but the trauma is just beginning. But first, don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. Click on that little bell icon for notifications and find the Devil's Advocate podcast on your favorite listening app. You know her, you love her, you read her in the Gazettes and Colorado politics. When in the world did you find time to learn to become a harpist?
I am a Celtic harpist, and I started playing the harp in 1978, so it has been a part of my life for a very long time.
What is a Celtic harpist? Is that a big harp, or is that the little one
that's a smaller harp?
So this is the one that Cupid plays when he's flying around, or what?
That's a lyre.
No, I'm a liar. What are you? Let's get back to what you do. How big is this harp that you play?
A Celtic harp is 45 pounds, and my particular harp has 36 strings on it. It's as large as a small harp gets.
And you actually do this professionally.
I do.
You make some cash doing this.
I make it's my side hustle, yeah.
I thought politicians just paid you off for better stories. You actually make some money on the side beyond reporting.
I do, and
Wow.
it's the other side of my brain. One side of my brain is the reporter, the other side's the musician.
So do you actually work during legislative session as well, or?
I try to avoid it, but I do some weekends. And this past session, I was greatly honored to be asked to play at the funeral mass of the late Rep. Rod Bockenfeld.
Wow.
Which was just such a...
What's the greatest gig you've ever done?
Oh, I'd probably have to say my senior recital in college.
What was the worst one?
There are too many to name. I've had a few that didn't go exactly the way I would have liked.
So in other words, if someone's looking for a little bit better press, they could always hire you to be a harpist for their party, and maybe you'd be nicer to them on the pages?
No.
No.
I keep those sides of my life very separate.
All right, let's get into the good stuff. This was a surprisingly rambunctious legislative session. I thought this would be a quieter session. The last couple sessions here for the governor before he's term limited, it was anything but that. What was the biggest surprise for you?
I actually viewed this session as more or less unremarkable.
Really?
Yeah. If you look at some of the things that have happened in the last couple of years, last year it was all about housing bills and property taxes, and the governor pretty much got everything he wanted. The year before, took a big hit when his housing bill died on the last day of the session. This year, it was a lot of things that got a lot of big policies that turned into little policies by the time we got to the 120 days.
It seemed pretty big to me. We've passed the largest and most ridiculous gun control law in the country.
But look at how that bill started. Look at what that started as, a ban on weapons with detachable magazines. And by the time you got to the end of it, it's go take a training course with CPW and get your certificate from the sheriff, and you can go have your gun.
I would have rathered the original one pass, to be honest, because it was so blatantly unconstitutional. This one is just open and ripe for abuse. There's no shall issue. You got to go first to your sheriff to get a permission slip to go take a class. Mm-hmm. The sheriff doesn't have to give you the permission slip, doesn't
Correct.
have a deadline to give you even an answer for the permission slip, and there's no limit on what he can charge you to give you the permission slip. I mean, this is just ripe with abuse.
Let's take it one step further. Say that you get that permission slip and you go to Colorado Parks and Wildlife to take your training course, because they're the one that's going to be in charge of that. What we heard in testimony when that bill was going through the legislature is that CPW is already responsible for hunter safety education, right? They're understaffed in that program. How are they going to manage whatever comes out of this law? Answer is, it might be a little tough.
Oh, and furthermore, they didn't put it under the concealed weapons permit system where you've got all these people, myself included, who have concealed weapons permits that have had this extra training, but there's no carve out there. And so why in the world the Department of Wildlife is in charge of making sure you handle your Glock well? You don't go hunting with your Glock.
Correct.
So it's just such an abusive, open to interpretation, terrible law. I wish the other one passed instead. My thoughts. But
Yeah.
I see that as a big deal. I also see as a big deal that this was the first time labor decided to ruin the peace over 80 years. Give me the rundown on this.
On the Labor Peace
Yeah.
Act. Okay. This was a bill that the governor vetoed last Friday. It was backed by the unions, pushed by the unions, and they wanted to take out the second election in a union election. The first one is you vote to have a union. The second one has to do with who pays dues. And it's the language basically is even if you don't want to be part of that union, you're going to pay dues.
Right.
And that's what
It's a forced dues.
It's forced dues.
If you want to keep your job, you pay the man.
Right. So what the unions wanted was to take out that second election. And there was a lot of conversations that went on. And when I looked at, it was a chart that I saw that had where business was, and the governor was very clear about this. He wanted a compromise. He did not want Senate Bill 5 in the shape that it turned up in his office. He didn't want that bill, and he threatened to veto it. So you had this business on this side, labor on this side, and labor moved a little tiny bit, and business moved quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
And nothing happened. At the end, the sponsors said, "We're going forward with this. We're going to call your bluff, Governor Polis," and he did it.
And I was impressed, but
vetoed
I
it.
think he had to. It really was an economy-killing bill. And what surprised me was during this negotiation, unions moved nowhere.
Very little.
Businesses moved way too much, in my opinion, and the union didn't take anything, which means I think they're just waiting for the next governor to come in and sign it what they want.
They don't have to wait that long because they're threatening to run a ballot measure on this. Now, do I think Coloradans are going to vote for it? Probably not. But they have two ballot measures that they're looking to put on, that labor is looking to put on the 26th ballot. So this isn't going to wait until we have another governor.
Well, and in response to that, the Independence Institute, which I run, we've always been under pressure to run a right-to-work-like initiative. We've never done that because we're not going to be the ones to break the peace. 80 years of peace over this, even though I don't like the system you have now, even if it's a vote of 75% of the workers who are present, from our point of view, we get to be ideologues about this. Nobody should be able to vote to get money out of you to give to a political organization. That's just wrong to us. So we've got in the hopper an initiative to protect workers' rights so that they never have to pay union dues if they don't want to pay union dues or to any organization. I mean, I can't imagine saying, well, you want your job, you're going to have to give money to the NRA, or you want your job, you're going to have to give money to Planned Parenthood, political organizations in order to feed your family. There's something I think Coloradans understand that's just wrong. So do you think they're going to put something on the ballot? If so, we'll be putting ours on the ballot as well.
That's what they're saying. They are saying that the unions are saying that they will put this on the ballot. The thing that I found kind of interesting about this is what the unions say having that second election means. It means that it's a lot easier to unionize in a small shop rather than a large one because of the
Right.
percentages. You could get 75% of a shop that has only 50 employees. Getting 75% of a shop that has 500, that's a much, much bigger hurdle. So that's what I think will wind up, the conversation will be about. It's about large companies.
And we're seeing what's happening to large companies in these states that have it. They're leaving. When Tesla moves to Texas, when Toyota moves to Tennessee, you're starting to see that, no, we're going some places where workers have the right not to be in a union. And I would hate to see that in Colorado. But what made them break this labor peace after 8 decades of détente?
Well, but that's exactly it. It's the fact that they can't unionize in large companies. I think that's a big part
But they
of
can. They just have to.
But they can't get the union dues if they can't get that 75% threshold in a large company. That's
If that were to
the
pass,
roadblock.
what's odd is Colorado then has workers' protection for government workers.
Yeah.
Government workers do not have to join a union to keep their job. But if this passed, private sector workers would, and government workers would have a higher level of protection. That's what I find pretty odd.
I would agree with that. It's odd.
Given the two things we just talked about, guns and unions,
Mm-hmm.
I call it the polis process. And we've seen this now for 7 sessions in a row. The left wants X. The governor says, I don't want to sign X because I'm not going to go that far off the deep end. Give me a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get a compromise, which means everything moves towards the left. I can see it on gun laws every year. There's a couple of, we're going to outlaw so-called assault weapons. Oh, give me a compromise. And they do these terrible bills like the one that came out here, or raised the age, or gave cities the right to ban all sorts of guns. Every year there's something else. On a lot of these bills, that's been the process. The process is, give me a compromise, and we'll get you where you want to go, leftists, but it's going to take a little longer than you would like. That doesn't seem to be playing as much this year.
Definitely not this year. Although you did see a lot of bills where there was, the governor said, I don't like this, I want a compromise. Sometimes he got it, sometimes he didn't. And you saw this a lot in the housing space.
Right.
Last year, there was a bill on having one flight of stairs in a 5-story building. I'm sort of, the logic on that sort of escapes me a little bit, but
It'd be one tall set of stairs.
well, but that's a way of saving construction costs.
Oh, I see what you're
guess.
saying.
Yeah.
All right.
So they tried that last year. The governor said, not going there. They did it again this year. Guess what? He signed it. Construction defects is another one. He didn't like what came out last year. It never made it to his desk. It never even came close. This year, he signed it. But it was a bill that was so dramatically different from what we've seen in the last couple of years, even going back maybe 10 years, on trying to reform the laws around building condos and what they call middle market housing, townhomes and condos.
They still haven't hit the construction defects issue head on, have they? They've nibbled around the corners.
They've nibbled around it, and you'll see a lot of lawmakers.
Give me a definition first.
Okay.
What is, keep hearing construction defects, for people who aren't following it, what is it that keeps us from having affordable condominiums in Colorado?
This actually goes back about 15 years. There was a law passed in the legislature in 2010, and it had to do with property and casualty companies. And they said, if you pass this law, we're leaving Colorado. We will pull out of the market. And this had to do with condo construction. And the legislature passed the law. The governor at that time, I think it was Bill Ritter, signed it. And they made good on their promise. The regulated property and casualty insurance market no longer exists in Colorado for condo construction. What that resulted in was the unregulated market. And that is a much more expensive market. For an affordable condo, it raises the cost of litigation. This is really about litigation. This is about getting sued over construction defects. There have been a ton of lawsuits in the state over that, and some of it has been over really, really serious problems, leaking pipes, poor joinings of walls and roofs and all that kind of stuff. But some of it's actually really kind of silly stuff. Did you not have your nails properly spaced in your studs? And do you have to go back and yank out all those nails just to get them properly spaced? That's silly, but that's considered a construction defect.
So if I'm hearing you right, this was really a war between trial lawyers who want to be able to sue on everything, and the insurance companies that have to pay for all these suits.
And the home builders.
And the home builders, and the trial lawyers won. home builders and the insurers, we're out of here.
Yeah.
We'll make apartments. We're not going to make homes, which means that that first step that a lot of people have of homeownership, a condominium, is out of reach.
It's the first step for young professionals. It's the first step for families. It's the last step for seniors who want to downsize from their single-family homes. And the market in the state died. When you have 3% of the market is now condos, and those condos are not the affordable ones that are in the $200,000 to $400,000 range. These are condos in the $1 million plus range. Affordable condos are not being built in Colorado, and we still have companies that won't build here, and home builders who won't build here because of it. So yes, this bill did address some of that litigation issue. It changed what it did is set up an incentive program for builders with a certificate that said, this has been built properly. It's had lots of third-party inspections and these inspectors are hired by the insurance companies. And this building is certified as being free of any structural construction defects. You get that when you buy a new condo, once these condos start getting built. That's sort of the big fix. Now, you have a lot of lawmakers who say it didn't go far enough. The home builders wanted more that they didn't get. Trial lawyers wanted more that they didn't get. So
what trial lawyers wanted more. Stop presses there.
But it's
really
a definition of a perfect bill because nobody's happy, right?
Well, and it also shows me the power of small regulatory changes and how long it takes to really feel the effect. So Colorado 15 years ago passes what I think we all know. So this bill went too far. It's chased out businesses, and now we can't afford homes.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you go backwards and you find that there's the government doing something, and now people can't afford homes, which will bring me to this one. There is a law or bill on his desk, we don't know what he's going to do on it, that would put more requirements on ride shares like Uber and Lyft. Now, for those of us who've had a few too many drinks, or those of us who can't have a car, handicapped, elderly, or young people, Uber has been the lifeline. Mm-hmm. But if you're part of the taxi cartel or the RTD transit world, you don't want that kind of competition. Uber has said, we're out of here if he signs it. What do you think he's going to do? And by the way, by the time people watch this, that might already have been done.
That's entirely possible. That's a really, really good question. If I had to bet money, I'd say he'll sign it.
Really?
Yeah.
My bet is he's going to veto it for two reasons. One, he knows it's bad law, although that has no bearing on what he signs. But I think a lot of it is because it has a tech element to it.
Correct.
That really, Uber and Lyft are not taxi companies, they're software companies. And as a software guy, as a data guy, as a tech guy, I think he gets that. And he sees what the problem is here. That's my guess.
The whole
hope
thing is tied up into a whole lot of other issues. It's not just about rideshare. It's also about the problems with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and all those DNA rape test kits that never got processed. And there's one person who's sort of the center point of all of that, and that's a lawmaker named Jenny Wilford, who was sexually assaulted by a driver from Lyft, who didn't have permission to be using the platform. He'd borrowed, which is not allowed, but now they're going to just make it blatantly illegal. You just can't do that. And that bill did get watered down quite a bit. There was going to be a mandate that Uber and Lyft had to provide the technology to record audio and visual while the rider is in the car, and they've made that an opt-in. And that was a very big give back by the sponsors of the bill, which included Representative Wilford. The victims' rights groups were not happy about that. So this is another part of, perhaps the governor saying, I want a compromise.
We'll see, but if Lyft leaves, if Uber leaves, I know people who will lose their mobility. They will be stuck at home, and it is heartbreaking. And it reminds me very much of the construction defects issue, which is, you might have great intention behind it, but the reality is you're going to end up hurting a lot more people than you're helping.
It's a good question about whether or not and it was Uber that made the claim that they were going to leave, whether they'd actually do it. We've seen this before, and you'll remember this better than anybody, I think, back in 2013 when they did the ban on ammunition magazines of over 15, and you had a company from Denver that said, "We're out of here," and went to Wyoming. Magpul
Right.
was the company.
Magpul, which, by the way, makes some of the most technically spectacular products. I mean, they're the gold standard for magazines and other things, and they pulled out and left.
They did. But for every company that says, "We're going to leave," you have a lot of other companies that are like, "Yeah, we don't like it," and they threaten to leave, and it doesn't happen. So, is Uber really serious about pulling out of a lucrative market?
Well, let's see. The insurance companies have pulled out.
They
More
did.
and more insurance companies are pulling out, and I wouldn't be surprised. It's sooner or later you can't do business in Colorado, and that's really what's happening. Getting back to another issue, that Colorado used to be a really competitive place and a business-friendly place. You look, and our competitiveness continues to drop. It is harder and harder to do business, dramatically, to the point where the Denver Chamber of Commerce, instead of trying to pull some new public works project, which is usually what they do, let's all get together and pass a transit package or a convention center package, are now going, wait a second, we're losing businesses. We can't do business here. And it's a death by 1,000 cuts in Colorado.
And the chamber will be the first to tell you that. I was at an event that they held last week, and they pointed out that at one point, Colorado was in the top 5 of the most competitive business environment, a good place for people to start a business. Come to Colorado. We're now down to 16th, and that is a drop that took only, I think, maybe 5 years. That's awfully scary.
Which is amazing, because Colorado was the destination place for people to become entrepreneurs. Whether you're making a brewery, a software company, or a ranch, you came to Colorado. All right, let's try a different direction. Polis has always tried to play this interesting thing. He's a chameleon in that in front of environmentalists, he's an environmentalist. In front of the tech bros, he's a tech bro. And of course, he's the libertarian governor, which those of us who are libertarian, and anybody who lives in Colorado, just laughs their ass off on that. But he's got a pretty good PR system. And so we've seen it on Fox News, and we've seen it in Reason Magazine, and outside of the state, people go, hey, you've got a pretty good governor there. So let's see if I can understand this. Our libertarian governor just made buying a gun really difficult and onerous, particularly if you don't have a lot of money or a lot of time. He's put in price controls during so-called emergencies, which is the worst thing you want to do. He's signed a bill for speech codes saying that if you misgender someone, you can be sued and criminally or civilly taken to court and have a punishment on this. He did something, I'm trying to remember, on pharmaceuticals this year. These are not the hallmarks of anybody who claims to be libertarian-ish or small government-ish. Does everybody now just accept outside of Colorado? Do the people in Colorado go, oh, he's a politician. He's not a libertarian. He's just
a politician. Of course he is.
But what about that shine? He was on the cover of Reason Magazine as the libertarian governor.
I think that shine has faded a little bit.
Is that all you're going to say, that shine has faded?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't think I want to go much further than that.
And why not?
Because I still have to get along with the guy.
Oh, with the governor. All right, then I'll go in the opposite direction.
All right.
Let me say some nice things about the governor. He stood up with a couple vetoes that he did not need to do.
Correct.
There has been a problem with transparency and openness down at the legislature. The session before this one, they passed a bill to exempt themselves from the open meetings law.
One of the worst bills on transparency, the biggest attack on Colorado's open meetings law that I have seen since that law was passed.
I mean, it was
horrendous.
It is horrendous. And it only took them a couple of weeks to take their new powers of darkness during the special session.
Yep.
And make deals behind closed doors where you reporters could not see, and then walk out and rubber stamp it. I've never seen, and the governor signed that bill. he should not have. There was another bill that was going to do another number. It was Senate Bill 77.
Yes.
And it would have been great for you. It would have been bad for me. For you, it had a different, it made a two-tier system, and you respectable media types could could get things sooner and at a less price from the government than our open records.
It would not have changed the status quo for the media. It would have kept everything the same as it is right now. Current law, where journalists are concerned, would not have changed at all. It just would have changed for everybody else.
Which means somebody's going to have to define
who is a journalist. Yeah, that is not a job for a government agency to have. That is not their role. They are not the ones making that definition. So I have to give the governor kudos for vetoing Senate Bill 77, but I also see that I kind of suspect that he's recognizing a growing backlash against these anti-transparency laws. And he still signed 2 bills during this session that crack down on transparency.
Which ones were those?
One was House Bill 1041. This has to do with name, image, and likeness for college athletes. The universities are now going to be able to pay their football, their basketball players for use of their name, image, and likeness. Those contracts are going to be kept confidential. So if there's great money that's going to the men's football program at CU, but the women's basketball program are getting nothing, we'll never know.
Really?
And they carved out a new exception to the open records law in this bill. And that had the transparency advocates, the Freedom of Information Coalition, the broadcasters, the Press Association, all going, we don't like that. And they made no substantial changes to it. It still got signed into law. The other bill had to do with the Wolf Compensation Fund. And ranchers have complained that when they file those claims, they've got looky-loos and pro-wolf people coming up to their ranches and harassing them, and they want to keep their name they want to keep that information confidential on who's filing these claims. And while I do appreciate, maybe more than a lot of reporters, the problems that ranchers are dealing with these wolf compensation things, this is taxpayer money that's going to pay these claims. Again, another carve out on the open records law.
The governor vetoed also a bill that I did not like, Senate Bill 86, which I thought was this wonderful way to empower social media companies to become nanny for the state. And it was an odd bill because it had what do they call it? Horseshoe politics, and that people on the far left and far right, people on the far left who hate companies and hate big companies who wanted to get to them, and people on the right said, no, we want to protect our kids. And in the name of protecting our kids, we're going to give these companies more rights to be policemen for the government.
That's not That's not an appropriate role, and the governor made that very, very clear when he vetoed that bill. And he came very close. He came within about 48 hours of having that veto overridden by the legislature. They overrode it in the Senate on a 29 to 5 vote, I think, or 29 to 6. And they only needed 24 votes. So there was very, very strong support. And they did that on a Friday. But what they did is, and they sent it over to the House immediately. The House sat on it over the weekend. They could have taken it up that day. Between Friday and Monday, the votes to override that veto disappeared.
Partly because of pressure from organizations like ours who said, no, this is not. And there was strange, again, left and right support for the veto, in the same way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we're doing with the Transparency Coalition. Here we are, you've got me sitting down with Jason Salzman, all saying we got to do something about transparency, which really tells me there's a problem with openness in government.
Sure, when you've got such divergent people, people who don't normally agree on almost anything, that are all working together to address this transparency issue, that's a powerful message, and I think the governor is hearing it. the veto on the social media bill, the veto on the open changes to the open records law. He's recognizing that there is a growing groundswell from people saying, we want our government transparent. We want to know what you're doing behind closed doors.
And there's a real arrogance down at the legislature. I want to make sure I see that facial reaction. Why such a strong reaction to that comment?
Because I've been down there for a long time, as you know. And the thing that I find more frustrating than anything is how much of the business of the people is done behind closed doors.
How so?
You see lawmakers walking off the floor and going into somebody's office, and the law is pretty clear. Wherever two or more is gathered, that's open to the public. And those meetings go on all over, just every single day. There's not a day that somebody is out there having a meeting with another lawmaker or with a whole handful of lawmakers, and you're not hearing about it.
What do you think happens in those meetings?
They're discussing policy. They're discussing bills. They're discussing.
They're vote trading.
They're figuring out how they want to manage a particular piece of legislation or a particular policy or whatever. And
why is it important that you and I get to see that stuff if we want to? What does it matter?
Let me tell you a little story. This is my favorite story about governmental transparency. Back in 2019, there was a big fight going on over the governor's appointments to the Colorado State Fair Board. The governor had appointed somebody to represent the Eastern Plains who lived in Boulder. As you can see, that's a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah, Boulder doesn't have the same personality as the Eastern Plains.
Not as a rule. And the Republicans in the Senate, and the Senate was 1817 Republican or Democrat that year. The Republicans found enough Democrats to vote down these appointments. And the Senate Majority Leader at that time was Steve Fenberg, our friend from Senate Bill 157 from last year, refused to hold a vote on these particular appointees. This was last day of session. So about 8 or 9 lawmakers went off into the president's office to talk about this. And I was like, I think I want to know what's going on here. So I went and knocked on the door and walked in. And they just sort of looked at me, and I've done this many, many times over the years, and I've actually encouraged other reporters to do the same. We call it storming the gates. And they just—
Is that actually, by the way, is that really the term?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
One of our reporters actually put storming the gates on a Post-it note and hung it above her desk. It was kind of cute. Anyway, I went in, and instead of them stopping the conversation, which a lot of times happens, they'll say, "Oh, where'd you want to go for lunch?" They kept running going. And after a while, they realized that they really needed to have a conversation with the governor. So one of the lawmakers turned to me and said, "We need to call the governor. I'm going to call him on my cell phone. Would you mind stepping out of the room?" And I said, "You bet I would. You tell him I'm here." Well, it's one of my favorite stories of all time about what happens behind closed doors, the stuff that you don't get to see.
Well, then let me ask you a question about that. You are a seasoned journalist. You've got a lot of experience here. You've got some years behind you. You've seen some shit. So that gives you the ability to go, what they're doing in there is an open meeting.
Yeah.
I'm walking in.
Yeah.
But if you're, let's be honest, the average age of reporters now is 16 and a half. Because they're easier to exploit when they're young. You get them out of J school and you pump them through. Those kids don't have the experience or the confidence, I think, to do that the way you would do it. Am I right?
I take them with me.
Say more.
Yes. Well, when I find out, or somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, they're doing X, you need to go find out what that is," I don't go alone anymore. I grab a bunch of reporters and say, let's get them. Let's go storm the gates.
Those other reporters are your competitors from other news sources. And your job is to score big stories for the Gazette, not help out somebody else.
Well, but I have a second job. And as the dean of the Capitol Press Corps, it is my job to mentor young reporters. It's to help them learn the ropes. And it's also to give them the confidence. If I'm willing to lead the way into that closed door room, you got to come with me, because there may be a good story here. A lot of times it isn't, but it keeps them on their toes. It lets them know that we're always watching.
But now they can have these meetings because they don't have this. You don't have the same protections thanks to what passed last year.
Yeah.
So do they ever now tell you, hey, Marianne, good to see you. Get the hell out of here?
They haven't yet. They haven't yet. But, the biggest problem with these things is actually finding out when they're going on. This stuff is hush hush. This is stuff that if we're lucky, we hear about it, and we'll challenge it. We'll go listen to it. We'll find out what's going on. Is there a conversation going on that the public should know about?
That's why the posting of meetings is so
important.
crucial.
Yeah.
So if people want to know the ins and outs of this, the law that they passed said we don't have to post these meetings. And we can keep a little note afterwards. So you could look at the minute. They don't keep minutes.
They weren't posting them before. They don't have to do it now. They weren't doing it before either. Unfortunately, the situation hasn't changed all that much.
In local governments and municipal governments, everything is written out on an agenda. If they're ever going to talk behind closed doors, they have to have an executive session, which needs to be recorded.
Correct.
And they need to have a reason for it. And if a judge says, no, that wasn't a good reason, then you have the tape of the meeting.
Yeah.
I'm assuming all these backroom meetings you're talking about, they always have a tape running in case?
Yeah, right. No.
So is it getting worse? Is the arrogance getting worse down there?
I have been concerned about a level of arrogance in the legislature for doing whatever they want to do, and is it worse? Not really. It's just it changes depending on who's in power, but I think it's always been there.
It's because there's no teeth behind.
There is none.
That's why we need to change the law and the Constitution to make sure people have some teeth to see what's going on.
Yeah, that is the saddest part. That's the saddest part of our sunshine laws. Is there's just no enforcement. There's no teeth. On the rare occasion, you might see somebody who's able to get a recording of an executive session that was improperly held, but that's so rare.
So finish the equation for me. As a journalist, you want to see this. As an activist and someone who's very passionate about politics, I want to see this. You can't see it. And therefore, what is the long-term problem? Why do you have an existential worry about government being run behind closed doors?
It should scare the heck out of everybody.
Because?
Because they make decisions that you don't get to know about. They're coming up with policies. I want to know who's behind that policy. And I'm not talking about the lawmaker. I'm talking about the other organizations that are involved, the other people who are involved. The lack of transparency means you don't get to know who's really, really behind some of this stuff.
And it's an open door for abuse.
Absolutely.
That's the part. When I keep hearing about, oh, we're worried about tyranny. We're worried about tyranny. Forget about the tyranny in Washington for a second. What about the tyranny that's going on in the state capitol when you've got power brokers making decisions that nobody can see until it's done? That's when things get bad.
That should scare everybody. People should demand with pitchforks, if necessary, the right to know what their government is doing with their taxpayer dollars, and they don't.
Finish it up on this question. Home rule issues. All right. You had a busy day because, well, lawsuits are flying.
Correct.
What is a home rule city?
Home rule is something that was established in the Constitution about 100 years ago. And it basically says a local government has the right to make certain decisions. A lot of it is around land use, zoning. Those are the biggest decisions.
So any city can be either a statutory city, which means the rules and the state law say, here's how you run your city, here's how you do whatever it is you're going to do, here's how you run the operations, or you can vote and say, no, we want to do our own thing. So Denver and Boulder and other go say, that doesn't work for us. We're going to be our own thing.
Correct.
We're going to run our own zoning laws. Well,
we want to be able to say what the character of our neighborhoods are going to look like. Which is a big part of that. They want to make decisions. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. They want to make decisions that are the best for their own particular communities. We have 102 home rule cities in this state.
That's a ton. That's
a lot.
That's 1 out of every 7 or so cities here are now home rule. And there's good and bad. And I can also see the bad, which is you want to have some really restrictive stuff, so nobody can build anything, and so everybody who's there is set. I'm talking about Boulder. And so that what it says is, oh, I'm sorry, you're not. You didn't get into the community soon enough. Screw you. You can't build a house here. All of our properties values go up.
Right.
Nobody else can get in.
Nobody can get in.
Right. So I can understand why, having a statewide law saying no, you cannot prevent people from doing this, or this with their property, or dividing it and putting something else there. I get that. And that's where the governor is on some of the things that he signed. What happened?
Well, last Friday, he issued an executive order that said if Mr. Greenwood Village, we'll take Greenwood Village as an example, they're the lead on this lawsuit. If you don't comply with this transit-oriented communities law, which says you have to build high-density housing, mostly it's going to be rentals, around your transit centers, if you don't comply with this law, we're going to take away your transportation funding, your money from the local affairs, which a lot of housing grants comes out of there, the Office of Economic Development money. There's $100 million at risk, and he pretty much put his foot down and said, we're going to put a hold on this money until you guys shape up. Well, 6 cities, all in the Front Range, on Monday decided to sue and say, we are home rule cities. You do not have the right to tell us how we decide what our communities are going to look like. Suing primarily over 2 things, and I thought that it was interesting that they picked these 2. One was the Transit-Oriented Communities Bill. The other one is over minimum parking requirements. And in both bills, they said the same thing. These are mixed issues of statewide and local concern, which was trying to get around that home rule language in the Constitution.
They want more parking spaces or less?
Less. Yeah, a lot less.
Which is part of the war on automobiles. And by the way, I don't know if there should be mandates on parking spaces, but there shouldn't be minimums or maximums. And guess what? Those developers that put in parking spaces, they're going to rent more places.
So
what do you think is going to happen with these lawsuits?
It's a little too early to say. I'm looking to see if some of the other home rule cities along the Front Range that have also kind of said, we're having trouble with this. And it's actually quite a few, to see if more home rule cities decide to get involved in this lawsuit. 5 of the 6 cities are fairly small. The largest one is Aurora. Denver and Boulder are also home rule cities. They're not signatories on this. You've got some other fairly large communities. You've got Douglas County, which wants to be home rule. I expect that if they win that fight, it wouldn't surprise me if they got involved in this too.
It's a real reason to become a home rule county.
It is. And we only have one other I believe we've only got one other home rule county, and that's Weld County.
Does this strike you as somewhat of a Trump-esque maneuver?
I have heard a number of people refer to it that way.
How so?
Well, because the president has been issuing executive orders right and left that say, I'm taking away your funding from this unless you do this. Variety of different things. It's immigration, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, various things. I'm going to take away your funding. That's exactly what this executive order, it's right out of the playbook.
Was there any big surprise this session? Anything that a veteran like you would go, now that one I didn't see coming?
No, not really. I kind of saw this session as no really big, grand policy changes, and I'm sure lawmakers would disagree with me. But this was kind of a quiet session to me.
Looking forward to next year.
Why?
This will be. All right, let me rephrase. Dreading next year will be the gov's last session.
Correct.
He is lame duck. My sense is this legislature is not going to give him a break on this stuff. I'm getting a sense they're going to be more aggressive and say, we're not going to moderate. You're going to have to make a decision on these the way we want it.
They don't have to moderate.
Right.
They're going to be running the show next year. But the thing is, well, I take it back. There was one big thing this year, and that was the budget. And that, more than anything, kept a lot of very expensive things from happening because there was no money. They had to cover a $1.2 billion shortfall. Next year is going to be worse because all the cuts they made this year are permanent. Next year, they're still going to have to deal with the same fiscal realities. And we wound up with 50 fewer bills or 57 fewer bills this year. And the bills that did pass, they either pushed off the spending till next year or some years down the road. The piper is going to come due on some of those bills next year, and the money is not there.
What happened to the Citizens Initiative to bring $300 some odd million to law enforcement?
Actually, it's a bit complicated, but it was really interesting how the Joint Budget Committee decided to fix that. It's $350 million.
And I forget the initiative number, but it was passed last November.
Proposition 130.
Right, the state is now going to fund local cops.
A variety of different things. There's something for the survivors of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty, and that was a big one for the governor. And he made it very clear at the beginning of the session that he wanted to see that particular issue addressed. He wanted to see some funding going into Prop 130 this year, if for no other reason than to deal with that particular issue. And that was tied to the death of a police officer out in Golden who was killed in the line of duty on a traffic stop. So what the JBC did, some very clever maneuvering, is they found a way to loan is maybe not the right word, but they're transferring some money to PARA, about $500 million. PARA is going to earn interest off of that, and that's going to pay for $35 million a year for the Prop 130 program.
And PARA is, of course, the state's retirement fund.
Correct.
By the way, I get that if a cop gets killed in the line of duty. My sense is the CDOT worker who gets killed in the line of duty looks at this and goes, well, wait a second, what about us?
Yeah.
You know, we're working for the state, and what makes their life more special than my life?
Maybe because their lives are, they're expected to put their lives on the line. CDOT workers are expected, not exactly expected to do that.
It's a dangerous job.
It is a dangerous job, and I don't dismiss that at all. We've had a lot of CDOT workers who have died on the job, but law enforcement has that extra risk.
Last question. Are you happy it's over?
I'm always happy it's over. I look forward to my summers, to spending more time with my husband and my critters and my daughter and her family, and I get excited about not working until 10 or 11 o'clock at night at the Capitol.
Is harp music always happy?
No.
So
no. Some of it can be very morose.
It all sounds very, angelic. It's very, very, very good for weddings and funerals and things like that.
Or lots of other events too. I played a lot of festivals, and those are happy days.
Do you play any rock and roll?
I do a killer version of Stairway to Heaven on the harp.
I want to hear it sometime. Marianne, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Till next week, think freedom.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.